East Timor or Timor-Leste, Tetum. Timor-Lorosa, officially the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste, is a sovereign state in maritime Southeast Asia. It comprises the eastern half of the island of Timor, the nearby islands of Ataro and Jako, and Ikusa, an exclave on the northwestern side of the island, within Indonesian West Timor. The country's size is about 15,410 square kilometers. East Timor was colonized by Portugal in the 16th century, and was known as Portuguese Timor until November 1975, when the Revolutionary Front for an Independent East Timor declared the territory's independence. 9 days later, it was invaded and occupied by Indonesia and was declared Indonesia's 27th province the following year. The Indonesian occupation of East Timor was characterized by a highly violent decades-long conflict between separatist groups and the Indonesian military. In 1999, following the United Nations-sponsored Act of Self-Determination, Indonesia relinquished control of the territory. East Timor became the first new sovereign state of the 21st century on 20 May 2002 and joined the United Nations and the Community of Portuguese-language countries. In 2011, East Timor announced its intention to gain membership status in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations by applying to become its 11th member. It is one of only two predominantly Christian nations in Southeast Asia, the other being the Philippines. Etymology: Timor derives from Timor, the word for east, in Indonesian and Malay, which became Timor in Portuguese and entered English as Portuguese Timor. Leste is the Portuguese word for east, resulting in Timor-Leste. In Tetum the name is Timor-Lorosa, from Lorosa the word for east, in that language. The official names under the constitution are República Democrática de Timor-Leste in Portuguese and República Democrática Timor-Leste in Tetum. The International Organization for Standardization official short form in English and all other languages is Timor-Leste, which has been adopted by the United Nations, the European Union, and the national standards organizations of France, the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, and Sweden. All diplomatic missions to the country, by protocol and the CIA World Factbook. History: descendants of at least 3 waves of migration are believed still to live in East Timor. The first were related to the principal Australoid indigenous groups of New Guinea and Australia, and arrived more than 40,000 years ago. Around 3000 BC, Austronesians migrated to Timor, and are thought to be associated with the development of agriculture on the island. Thirdly, Proto-Malays arrived from South China and North Indochina. Before European colonialism, Timor was included in Chinese and Indian trading networks, and in the 14th century was an exporter of aromatic sandalwood, slaves, honey, and wax. It was the relative abundance of sandalwood in Timor that attracted European explorers to the island in the early 16th century. During that time, European explorers reported that the island had a number of small chiefdoms or princedoms. The Portuguese established outposts in Timor and Maluku. Effective European occupation of a small part of the territory began in 1769, when the city of Dili was founded and the colony of Portuguese Timor declared. A definitive border between the Dutch colonized western half of the island and the Portuguese colonized eastern half of the island was established by the Permanent Court of Arbitration of 1914, and it remains the international boundary between the successor states East Timor and Indonesia. For the Portuguese, East Timor remained little more than a neglected trading post until the late 19th century, with minimal investment in infrastructure, health, and education. Sandalwood remained the main export crop, with coffee exports becoming significant in the mid-19th century. As was often the case, Portuguese rule was generally neglectful but exploitative where it existed. At the beginning of the 20th century, a faltering home economy prompted the Portuguese to extract greater wealth from its colonies, which was met with the East Timorese resistance. waged by Allied forces and East Timorese volunteers against the Japanese. The struggle resulted in the deaths of between 40,000 and 70,000 East Timorese. The Japanese eventually drove the last of the Australian and Allied forces out. However, following the end of World War II and Japanese surrender, Portuguese control was reinstated. Following the 1974 Portuguese Revolution, Portugal effectively abandoned its colony on Timor, and civil war between East Timorese political parties broke out in 1975. The Revolutionary Front for an Independent East Timor resisted a Timorese Democratic Union coup attempt, and unilaterally declared independence on 28 November 1975. Fearing a communist state within the Indonesian archipelago, the Indonesian military, with Western support, launched an invasion of East Timor in December 1975. Indonesia declared East Timor its 27th province on 17 July 1976. The UN Security Council opposed the invasion, and the territory's nominal status in the UN remained as non-self-governing territory under Portuguese administration. Indonesia's occupation of East Timor was marked by violence and brutality. A detailed statistical report prepared for the Commission for Reception, Truth and Reconciliation in East Timor cited a minimum bound of 102,800 conflict-related deaths in the period 1974 to 1999, namely, approximately 18,600 killings and 84,200 excess deaths from hunger and illness. The East Timorese guerrilla force fought a campaign against the Indonesian forces from 1975 to 1999. The invasion was supported by the United States government. The 1991 Dili massacre was a turning point for the independence cause internationally, and an East Timor solidarity movement grew in Portugal, Australia, and other Western countries. Following the resignation of Indonesian President Suharto, a UN-sponsored agreement between Indonesia and Portugal allowed for a UN-supervised popular referendum in August 1999. A clear vote for independence was met with a punitive campaign of violence by East Timorese pro-integration militia with the support of elements of the Indonesian military. With Indonesian permission, an Australian-led international peacekeeping force was deployed until order was restored. In late 1999, the administration of East Timor was taken over by the UN through the United Nations Transitional Administration in East Timor. The INTERFET deployment ended in February 2000 with the transfer of military command to the UN. By May 2002, over 205,000 refugees had returned, and East Timorese independence was formalized on 20 May 2002 with Zanana Gusmao sworn in as the country's first president. East Timor became a member of the UN in 2002. The following year, Gusmao declined another presidential term, and in the build-up to the April 2007 presidential elections there were renewed outbreaks of violence. José Ramos Horta was elected president in the May 2007 election. Ramos Horta was critically injured in an attempted assassination in February 2008. Prime Minister Gusmao also faced gunfire separately but escaped unharmed. Australian reinforcements were immediately sent to help keep order. In 2006, the United Nations sent in security forces to restore order when unrest and factional fighting forced 15% of the population to flee their homes. In March 2011, the UN handed off operational control of the police force to the East Timor authorities. The United Nations ended its peacekeeping mission on 31 December 2012. Government. The head of state of East Timor is the President of the Republic, who is elected by popular vote for a 5-year term. Although his executive powers are somewhat limited, the president does have veto power over government's legislation. Following elections, the president appoints the leader of the majority party or majority coalition as the Prime Minister of East Timor. As head of government, the Prime Minister presides over the cabinet. The unicameral East Timorese Parliament is the national parliament or Parlamento Nacional, whose members are elected by popular vote to a 5-year term. The number of seats can vary from a minimum of 52 to a maximum of 65. The East Timorese constitution was modelled on that of Portugal. The country is still in the process of building its administration and governmental institutions. Government departments include the Policía Nacional de Timor-Leste, East Timor Ministry for State and Internal Administration, Civil Aviation Division of Timor-Leste, and Immigration Department of Timor-Leste. Administrative divisions. East Timor is divided into 13 municipalities, which, in turn, are subdivided into 65 administrative posts, 442 sucos, and 2,225 aldeas. Foreign relations and military. East Timor sought membership in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in 2007, and a formal application was submitted in March 2011. Indonesia supports East Timor's bid to join ASEAN. The Timor-Leste Defense Force is the military body responsible for the defense of East Timor. The FFDTL was established in February 2001 and comprised 2 small infantry battalions, a small naval component, and several supporting units. The FFDTL's primary role is to protect East Timor from external threats. It also has an internal security role, which overlaps with that of the National Police of East Timor. This overlap has led to tensions between the services, which have been exacerbated by poor morale and lack of discipline within the FFDTL. The FFDTL's problems came to a head in 2006 when almost half the force was dismissed following protests over discrimination and poor conditions. The dismissal contributed to a general collapse of both the FFDTL and PNTL in May and forced the government to request foreign peacekeepers to restore security. The FFDTL is being rebuilt with foreign assistance and has drawn up a long-term force development plan. Geography. Located in Southeast Asia, the island of Timor is part of the maritime Southeast Asia, and is the largest and easternmost of the Lesser Sunda Islands. To the north of the island are the Ombai Strait, Wetar Strait, and the Greater Banda Sea. The Timor Sea separates the island from Australia to the south, and the Indonesian province of Eastern Nusa Tenggara lies to East Timor's west. Much of the country is mountainous, and its highest point is Tatamalor at 2,963 meters. The climate is tropical and generally hot and humid. It is characterized by distinct rainy and dry seasons. The capital, largest city, and main port is Dili, and the second largest city is the eastern town of Bokor. East Timor lies between latitudes 8 degrees and 10 degrees south, and longitudes 124 degrees and 128 degrees east. The easternmost area of East Timor consists of the Pachor Range and the Lake Iralalaro area, which contains the county's first conservation area, the Nino Conas Santana National Park. It contains the last remaining tropical dry forested area within the country. It hosts a number of unique plant and animal species and is sparsely populated. The northern coast is characterized by a number of coral reef systems that have been determined to be at risk. Economy. East Timor has a market economy that used to depend upon exports of a few commodities such as coffee, marble, oil, and sandalwood. East Timor's economy grew by about 10% in 2011 and at a similar rate in 2012. Timor now has revenue from offshore oil and gas reserves, but little of it has gone to develop villages, which still rely on subsistence farming. Nearly half the population lives in extreme poverty. The Timor-Leste Petroleum Fund was established in 2005, and by 2011 it had reached a worth of $8.7 billion. East Timor is labeled by the International Monetary Fund as the most oil-dependent economy in the world. The Petroleum Fund pays for nearly all of the government's annual budget, which has increased from $70 million in 2004 to $1.3 billion in 2011, with a $1.8 billion proposal for 2012. The economy is dependent on government spending and, to a lesser extent, assistance from international donors. Private sector development has lagged due to human capital shortages, infrastructure weakness, an incomplete legal system, and an inefficient regulatory environment. After petroleum, the second largest export is coffee, which generates about $10 million a year. Starbucks is a major purchaser of East Timorese coffee. 9,000 tons of coffee, 108 tons of cinnamon and 161 tons of cocoa were harvested in 2012, making the country the 40th ranked producer of coffee, the 6th ranked producer of cinnamon and the 50th ranked producer of cocoa worldwide. According to data gathered in the 2010 census, 87.7% of urban and 18.9% of rural households have electricity, for an overall average of 38.2%. The agriculture sector employs 80% of the active population. In 2009, about 67,000 households grew coffee in East Timor, with a large proportion being poor. Currently, the gross margins are about $120 per hectare, with returns per labor day of about $3.70. There are 11,000 households growing mung beans as of 2009, most of them subsistence farmers. The country was ranked 169th overall and last in the East Asia and Pacific region by the Doing Business 2013 report by the World Bank. The country fared particularly poorly in the registering property, enforcing contracts and resolving insolvency categories, ranking last worldwide in all three. In regards to telecommunications infrastructure, Timor-Leste is the second to last ranked Asian country in the World Economic Forum's Network Readiness Index, with only Myanmar falling behind it in Southeast Asia. NRI is an indicator for determining the development level of a country's information and communication technologies. Timor-Leste ranked number 141 overall in the 2014 NRI ranking, down from 134 in 2013. The Portuguese colonial administration granted concessions to Oceanic Exploration Corporation to develop petroleum and natural gas deposits in the waters southeast of Timor. However, this was curtailed by the Indonesian invasion in 1976. The resources were divided between Indonesia and Australia with the Timor Gap Treaty in 1989. East Timor inherited no permanent maritime boundaries when it attained independence. A provisional agreement defined a joint petroleum development area and awarded 90% of revenues from existing projects in that area to East Timor, and 10% to Australia. An agreement in 2005 between the governments of East Timor and Australia mandated that both countries put aside their dispute over maritime boundaries and that East Timor would receive 50% of the revenues from the resource exploitation in the area from the Greater Sunrise development. In 2013, East Timor launched a case at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague to pull out of a gas treaty that it had signed with Australia, accusing the Australian Secret Intelligence Service of bugging the East Timorese cabinet room in Dili in 2004. There are no patent laws in East Timor.